Welcome again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles the human beings behind the really big ideas that are shaping the world, inspiring future and future creators, and for all those that like really good stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your exponential health ambassador along for this journey. Today we are going to enter the area of rare diseases. A rare disease is generally any disease that affects a small population of folks. And in the United States, the Rare Disease Act of 2002 defines rare diseases strictly according to their prevalence. Any disease or condition that affects fewer than 200,000 people in the United States, or about 1 in 1,500 people. The definition sort of parallels the Orphan Drug Act of 1983, the federal law written to encourage research into rare diseases and possible cures. In Japan, the definition is a little different. It's about 1 in 50,000 patients, 1 in 2,500. While the European Commission, it's about 1 in 2,000, but there's some cutoffs in regards to diseases that are not technically chronically debilitating or inadequately treated. The U.S. organization Global Genes estimates currently that about 300 million people worldwide that are living with one of around 7,000 diseases that are currently defined as rare by the U.S. definition. Chronic genetic diseases are commonly classified as rare, and rare diseases can result from bacterial, viral infections, allergies, chromosomal disorders, various degenerative and proliferative causes, and so forth. Today's guest, who I'm really honored to have join us to delve further into this topic, not just from the perspective of a clinician and an investigator, but also as a patient himself, is Dr. David Fajgenbaum. Dr. Fajgenbaum earned his medical degree from the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia, and is currently assistant professor of medicine at the Division of Translational Medicine and Human Genetics at Penn. He's associate director of the patient impact of the Penn Orphan Disease Center. He's the founding director of the Castleman Disease Center at Penn, and also co-founder and executive director of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. Dr. Fajgenbaum currently leads the Castleman Research Program at Penn as primary investigator for 18 translational research studies, including an international national history study and the first ever NIH-funded research of idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. His published research has really changed the way idiopathic multicentric Castleman is researched and treated, and as a patient himself is in his longest remission ever, thanks to precision treatments that he identified for himself. He is currently the author of a book called Chasing My Cure, A Doctor's Race to Turn Hope into Action. Dr. Fajgenbaum also co-founded the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network in 2012 to accelerate research and treatments into Castleman's disease through a collaborative network approach, which was a business-inspired approach to biomedical research, which has become a blueprint for advancing rare disease research on many different fronts. He is also the co-founder of the National Students AMF Support Network, which stands for Actively Moving Forward, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting grieving college students that have either been diagnosed with a terminal illness or have a loved one with a diagnosis of a terminal illness or death. And he's co-authored We Get It, Voices of Grieving College Students and Young Adults, a book for grieving college students and those who wish to support them. Dr. Fajgenbaum also received his MBA here at Penn at the prestigious Wharton School, where he was granted a wide range of awards, and his work has been highlighted internationally across media sources, New York Times, Science, The Today Show, Reader's Digest, Forbes, a truly amazing set of information. I'm so glad we have him today. So Dr. Fajgenbaum, thank you really very much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be on the show with you.
Thank you so much. Typically, when we start off the show, we usually give our guests the floor just to talk about themselves for a little bit. And I was hoping that you could really just go into who Dr. David Fajgenbaum is, where you grew up, how you got interested originally in science and in medicine, and ultimately, if you could sort of take us up to that point in 2010 where things really changed for you, sort of, I'll call BC or before Castleman's.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had always been interested in science and in medicine, but I didn't know for sure if that was a career path that I wanted to pursue. I trained relentlessly to play college football. I dreamed of playing college football one day, and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to be recruited to Georgetown. We're certainly not known for our football team, but I was thrilled to be able to play football at Georgetown. And just a couple weeks after I got there, kind of achieving this childhood dream, I had a really major turning point in my life. And that was when my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer. She was really my closest friend, and was such an incredible mother, supporter, just an amazing person. So with her diagnosis, that really struck me to my core, and how to kind of respond to this. And I really struggled being away at college and having my mom sick at home. I was in DC at school. My mom was back in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she battled brain cancer just valiantly for about 15 months after her diagnosis. And during the course of her battle, I really, my priorities changed quite a bit, from wanting to play college football and maybe professional football, to just being totally focused on wanting to become a doctor to treat patients like my mom, and also wanting to create this foundation, which you mentioned, called AMF, a support network for grieving college students. I promised my mom just before she passed away that I would create something in her memory, and I would name it after her. Her name was Anne-Marie Fajgenbaum, so AMF, those were her initials. And then we used those initials to now name the organization that would honor her, initially ailing mothers and fathers, now actively moving forward. And that was so critical for me, both in how I coped with her death, but also how I would be able to honor her life. And so, you mentioned BC, before I became ill with Castleman disease, and I've kind of have another way of thinking about that. And when I was first diagnosed with Castleman disease, I nearly died, and I've considered that to be the start of my overtime. When I had my last rites read to me, that's overtime. So for me, the first half of my life was before my mom became ill. A really big turning point was when she became ill. Sure. The second half of my life was really driving forward support for grieving college students, training to become a cancer doctor. As you mentioned, I went to England for graduate school, and then I came back to Penn for medical school. And my first 3 years of medical school were focused on training to become an oncologist to treat cancer patients in memory of my mom. And then that kind of gets us right up to August of 2010, when my life took another big turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for, I was unaware that the foundation was named after your mother, but that's I appreciate you you mentioning that, because I think it really tells a lot about you, and sort of the different passions that have driven you,
Yeah.
not just in that aspect of your life, of course, but everything that you've done afterwards. Taking us now, though, into that, into 2010, obviously your life then really hits an amazing turn of events that many of us won't experience, most likely, this roller coaster of sort of immune system pathologies and going wild in your body, retinal hemorrhaging, and then sort of the medical establishment not really knowing what for 7 weeks this was all about. They thought you might have had lymphoma or lupus or mono or something, and then somebody figured out, wait, you have none of that. You have this very rare set of conditions known as Castleman's disease, which is classified as a lymphoproliferative disorder, where certain groups of white blood cells are produced in excessive quantities. Could you talk just a little bit about, on the show, we talk obviously a lot of unmet medical needs that the public is as well aware of, but obviously within that basket of rare diseases, of which Castleman is one of these 7,000, it doesn't have the same, obviously, if I want to look for somebody to talk about Alzheimer's disease, there's a lot of people out there that know about Alzheimer's, and then even within the thought leader circle, there's a lot of thought leaders on Alzheimer's. But when it comes to something like this, Dr. Castleman, he named this thing back in 1956, but it's the thought leader and the discoverer and it all becomes the same thing. I mean, can you sort of walk us through what has happened in terms of Castleman's since 1956, and then sort of what the model currently is for any of these extremely rare diseases, when really nobody seems to know what's going on besides the person that really discovered it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So back in 2010, I was diagnosed with this disease, idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, a subtype of Castleman disease. And it was a frightening diagnosis because so little was known about the disease. The little bit that was known was that it was very deadly and that patients didn't live long with this disease. But no one really knew how or why or what really was going on. And to your point, if you look back to 1956 when Benjamin Castleman described these first few cases, in the time from 1956 to 2010, there had been very few breakthroughs. There had been, and it's not because people had been banging their head against a wall, studying, trying to figure this thing out. It was because very little work had been done. It was just that it wasn't that it was this complex challenge. It was just that no one had really been searching. And so within Castleman disease, from 56 to 2010, for over 50 years, really the only things that had been discovered about this disease were, one, that Castleman disease actually includes a number of subtypes and that you really should subtype them out, and that Castleman's is just kind of an umbrella term for a number of diseases. So that was an important breakthrough, because patients have different prognoses, different treatments depending on your subtype. I have the most severe subtype, the idiopathic multicentric subtype, but the other major breakthrough was discovering that this one particular immune molecule called interleukin 6, this one particular protein, was very elevated in some patients. And the important breakthrough was that attacking and targeting that protein, interleukin 6, with a drug was quite effective in some patients. In fact, there's a physician in Japan who discovered that interleukin 6 was elevated, and he developed the first drug that targeted interleukin 6. And his colleague told me a few years ago that this gentleman, Kazu, had actually given the drug to himself as the first human to ever get it, to
Wow.
prove that it was safe back in the 90s. And so I asked my friend Kazu, I said, Kazu, Makoto just told me that you were the first human to ever get tocilizumab, that you gave it to yourself to prove that it was safe. He said, no, 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 I didn't give it to myself. The nurse, she gave it to me. said, exactly, Kazu, exactly. And so, fortunately, Kazu developed this drug. It actually went on to get approval in Japan for Castleman disease. And then a U.S. drug company purchased it and started studying that drug in other diseases. And so now it's approved for rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, here in Philadelphia and in other places, you will be very well aware of the whole CART therapy story, and CART therapy, and how the first pediatric patient to be treated with CART, her name's Emily Whitehead. She nearly died after she got CART therapy. And actually, the drug they gave her to save her life was this drug, tocilizumab, the drug that my friend Kazu developed and tested on himself. So this drug, though, was developed for a rare disease, for Castleman disease, back in the 90s. It went on to then save Emily Whitehead's life in the 2010s. And actually, if it had not saved her life, then the entire CART therapy program likely would have been completely dismantled, which is kind of our biggest and greatest hope in all of cancer. And so I think it highlights an important lesson about how rare disease research, rare diseases are understudied, they're under-recognized, but importantly, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Because so little is done, if you do a little bit of research for rare diseases, you can have kind of an outsized impact as far as breakthroughs for that rare disease. And actually, some of those breakthroughs for rare diseases actually spill over to other diseases, like in this case, cancer. So, when I think about rare diseases, as I said, I think about low-hanging fruit, that you can make big progress, major gains for these diseases, but also the impact it can have beyond the rare disease. And I think Castleman's is a great example of this.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, the point of the low-hanging fruit, and it's such an integral part of your story, because from what I read, they started off obviously with lots of high dose steroids, which had some benefit, but you kept flaring, and then you went into more and more of these caustic chemotherapy type interventions. You described the disease; it is sort of this weird hybrid of autoimmune and cancer. And then you ended up, through your own work, your thinking, your research, your forming of the Castleman Disease Collaborative, rapamycin, or sirolimus, which this macrolide has been used for organ transplant, and it's a very once again an elegant part of the story, I think, because I come out of I spent most of my career at some facet of pharmaceutical industry, but I know when I was in big pharma, we had
Yeah.
these closets full of millions and
Yep.
millions of compounds that weren't approved for anything, but we would test them for all sorts of stuff. And Pfizer and GSK and everybody has them. But what you went one level further. You said, look, there's thousands of drugs on the market.
Yep.
They have certain pharmacology, but as we know, the complexity of this sort of what I'll call the genomic space, how
Yep.
thing, we know very little about it. And so you
Right.
took this elegant step, what I think is now defined as repurposing. We have all these
Yes.
drugs, we don't know what they do. Let's try them in other diseases because we know they're safe. We know they have, some decent degree of tolerability in these patients.
Yep.
Let's look at this and make some more common sense. Talk a little bit about through that, and then if you would sort of how that model, which then you've brought into the Castleman's network process, could address thousands of other rare diseases and be applied in that context.
Absolutely. These are really great points that you bring up. So just as you mentioned early on, 30 million Americans have one of 7,000 rare diseases. And of those 7,000 rare diseases, about 95% of them do not have a single FDA-approved therapy. Zero FDA-approved therapies for 95% of these rare diseases. And so we have a long way to go for rare disease drug development and for saving rare disease patients' lives, which actually make up a large proportion of the U.S. population. And we need new drug development. We need new drugs. We need new modalities. But in the interim, before we get these new drugs and before these drugs come to market, what we really need to do, in my opinion, is look back at the 1,500 drugs that have already been FDA approved for at least one condition and begin to ask the question, what else can they be used for? Let's not just look ahead at what drugs are in the future. Let's look in our rearview mirror at all the drugs that already exist. And as you said, they're safe, they're effective for at least something, and we have an idea for how they work, or else they wouldn't have gotten approved. And so you're exactly right. In Castleman disease, I was diagnosed back in 2010. I nearly died for the first time just a few weeks after my diagnosis. Unfortunately, I finally got the diagnosis, but unfortunately, I would continue to relapse after relapse after relapse, to a point where I had run out of all options. There were no more drugs to try. I was approaching my lifetime limit of chemotherapy, and I was out of options. And so there was no information. There was no Googling or finding the world's expert to be able to tell me that there was another drug we hadn't tried yet, because I was with the world's expert, and the world's expert didn't have any more answers. And so just as you said, with that, at that last stage, by the fifth time that I nearly died and I was completely out of options, that's when I decided to dive into my data. And I should also mention that the fourth time that I almost died was when I decided to create this foundation, the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, to try to fight back against Castleman's. So when I started conducting laboratory research into Castleman disease, but by the fifth time, about a year after I started my fight, was when I started to dig into the data from the experiments I've been running. I started to dig into the samples that I've been collecting on myself. And from a series of experiments, I had a signal within the data that suggested to me that maybe this drug, sirolimus, could work. And I talk about this quite extensively in my book, In Chasing My Cure, about kind of how we got from point A to point B. And there were a lot of steps along the way. I mean, you will remember that there were hints. There were things like these cherry hemangiomas or blood moles that were popping up when I first got sick. And there were things like the fluid accumulation and the way my lymph nodes were described that kind of were hinting to what was happening for years and years. But there really was kind of this eureka moment where kind of it all came together. And oh my gosh, maybe this drug could work. And people ask me, how confident was I that this drug actually could work? And I think honestly, I can say that I maybe thought there was about a 10% chance that it might work. So I really wasn't all that confident. But in the absence of any other options, where everything else is 0%, 10% is actually pretty good.
Absolutely.
And so we decided to go ahead and try this drug. And I'm doing extremely well right now. It's now been over 5.5 years that I've been in remission. I nearly died 5 times in the first 3.5 years. Now 5.5 years in remission, no relapses. I'm doing well. We started giving the drug to other Castleman disease patients. And so I think, as you said, it's really exciting for Castleman disease. There's 5,000 patients diagnosed each year in the U.S. with Castleman disease. So it's about as common as ALS. So it's a rare disease, but there's not that there are no patients, not that I'm the only one. So it's rare, but we also spend a lot of time, as you mentioned, thinking about how can we think beyond Castleman disease? What lessons can we apply from this journey? I was kind of on death's doorstep. I was out of options, like many others are in the rare disease space. And so, what can we learn from this experience? And for us, we've really boiled it down to an 8-step approach to research, an approach that we've been partnering with Global Genes and with other umbrella organizations to try to share what we call the collaborative network approach, or the Castleman's approach to research with other diseases. And that 8-step approach is really quite revolutionary. And I don't use that term lightly, because we basically say in research, or the traditional way to do research is to raise money and then invite the best applicants to apply, and then to select the best applications from those research proposals. And we said, that works for when you have millions of dollars and you have hundreds of applicants, because someone's going to rise to the top. But
Right.
if you have two or three applicants, you've got $10,000 to give out, it's really unlikely that your 2 or 3 applicants are going to have the best idea and have the best skill set and the best background to actually do the work. So we said, let's not just wait and hope that all these things line up. Let's build a community. Let's invest time and money into getting physicians, researchers, and patients together. Then let's use that community to prioritize what should be done. And then let's go find the best person in the world to actually do those studies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of approach, which we boiled down to these 8 steps, is something that other foundations are starting to follow. It's also something that we hope to share far and wide beyond Castleman disease. And a really important part of this process, I think it's step number 6, is around asking the question from my laboratory research that we do here at Penn and at other labs: what drugs already exist that might actually be effective at treating this particular disease? Not just what drugs do we need to develop, but what can we use that already exists? And I really hope this becomes a model for many other diseases. And this is one of the reasons I wrote Chasing My Cure, really for 3 reasons. One is, as I mentioned, to share with other rare diseases this approach to that we've taken to Castleman disease, hopefully to inspire other rare disease groups. The second is to raise awareness about Castleman disease. I'm doing really well. Other patients have benefited from the drug, but many other patients have not benefited from this drug that I'm on, and we still have a long way to go. So we still want to keep pushing forward the science for Castleman's. And thirdly, I learned a lot about life and about living from nearly dying 5 times, lessons that I want to share with the world. So whether you have Castleman's or a rare disease, or you have no disease at all, but you're facing life's challenges, I want to share these lessons that I've learned, so that other people don't have to go through what I went through.
And it's so important, and it's so inspiring listening to you talk about that. Speaking about sort of the grief and the anxiety and beyond with regard to this, and thinking about actively moving forward, and as you said, once you put together this 30 million folks that are around the United States somewhere with these questions, tell us a little more what AMF is focusing on in this equation, because I think about the grief and all of that, but at the same time, I know it's not directly related, but we are in this weird situation now with an extreme range of a much higher amount of teen suicide, and
Right.
and I see these two things sort of obviously connected in some ways. Talk a little bit more about what you do with that part of the work that you're involved in terms of how you help these grieving students and younger people.
So I started AMF back in 2004, and it was very much focused on grieving college students that experienced the illness or death of a loved one. Initially just parents, and that's when it was ailing mothers and fathers. And then we realized there are many young adults who have experienced the illness or death of a close friend or a sibling, so not just parents. And so that's when we renamed it Actively Moving Forward, to make it not just about parents, mothers and fathers, but anyone coping with illness to actively move forward. And so through AMF, we early on were very focused just on the college student, college students dealing with this. And as you said, teen suicide during college, these are real issues that we're facing as a country that unfortunately don't get enough attention. They need more attention, because I think awareness and attention can help to maybe prevent some of these suicides. If there was more awareness, particularly of people who have attempted suicide and have decided and have realized that, what it can do to those that they love, I think potentially that could have an impact. So through AMF, we started out being very focused on college students, but actually over the years and soon after I became ill with Castleman disease, I began shifting my focus and my time more towards the Castleman disease fight, and I've shifted my time away from AMF. I'm still a board member for AMF and actually just participated in a board meeting this past Monday, but so I'm thrilled and so excited to see the evolution of AMF from just kids that have a parent that is ill to then say, let's also include college kids who have any loved one, however they define it, that's ill or has passed away, to actually more recently as an organization, we recently made a decision as a board that we aren't just going to say college students dealing with the illness or death of a loved one, but we're going to expand to young adults dealing with the illness or death of a loved one. So of course that includes all college students, but it also includes people of college age that don't go to college, because that's a huge population that are also unsupported, that are also dealing with the same issues of college students, but even a few years after the college age, the 22 to the late 20 age range. So I'm really excited about our evolution. And as I think about my mom and her legacy, her life, and to think about how this organization has continued on the way that she lived and helping a lot of people. Most people that hear about AMF, or nearly all people who hear about AMF these days and have AMF chapters, they don't even know that AMF, that those were my mom's initials. They know of it as actively moving forward. And it's actually kind of special, I think, that her life lives on, and that it lives on even without people knowing about it, and that by supporting a friend or a classmate or a parent or a loved one or a student, that people are continuing her life and her life's mission.
Absolutely. It's a lovely story.
And
I recently read about your relationship with the Chan Zuckerberg Science Initiative. Obviously, of Facebook fame, they are dedicating their billions to eradicating diseases, including rare diseases. Obviously, whenever I hear about work like yours and others, I really wish that there was infinite dollars that were raining down from the sky to move everything forward. But obviously, no one has a crystal ball. But can you take us out 10 years? What do you want to see in the clinic? Do you vision? Are you going to be doing more Castleman studies? The other diseases that you're thinking of related to Castleman's that you're going to be focusing on? What's going to be happening in 2030 for your lab and your team?
great question. So I think that by 2030, I'm hoping that we will have accomplished three major goals. The first is that the disease that I study in particular is called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. Idiopathic meaning that the etiology is unknown, the cause is unknown. I would like by then to have uncovered the cause, so basically to have eradicated idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease and made it whatever it is, cancer-driven multicentric Castleman disease, or gene XYZ driven Castleman disease, whatever that cause is. I really want us to uncover it, but not just to know the cause, it's to improve therapies. It's if we can uncover what's going on, then we can improve therapies for Castleman disease. And so that's number one, uncover etiology. And the goal, and if I'll be thrilled if by 2030 that we have a drug for every patient who's diagnosed with Castleman disease that makes sure that they can return to their pre-disease quality of life and quantity of life. So I don't know if we can get to the cure word. To cure something, you need to no longer be on treatment. And if we can do that, that's amazing. But in the interim, if we can get to a place where there's a drug that keeps all of us alive, living as we did before we got sick, then that's my goal. That's number one. Number two is that Castleman disease, as you mentioned, sits at the intersection of cancer and autoimmunity. And I mentioned CART therapy earlier. CART therapy is an example of reprogramming the immune system to kill cancer. And so there's this really important and exciting interface between cancer and the immune system. And I believe Castleman disease is a really important disease that can give us insights into both cancer and immunology. And so I'm really excited as a lab and also as a research program to begin to dissect a bit more this intersection between the two, autoimmunity and cancer, and how we can learn how to better treat cancer and how to better treat autoimmunity from understanding that intersection, because most diseases are either one or the other. Castleman's is right at the intersection. So that's number two. And number three is thinking beyond Castleman disease, beyond related diseases, and just rare diseases generally. And what I would be thrilled about is if a large portion of the 7,000 rare diseases are taking this proactive approach to research, the collaborative network approach, where we're not just raising money and hoping and praying that the right person applies for the right project at the right time, but that we're actually using patient perspectives and we're engaging community members to prioritize those research studies, and then making sure that the right person does that work. That's, that would be a real dream for me, and really important. By 2030, it'd be nice to see if we could have some data on how that change from a proactive approach maybe led to more breakthroughs and more cures than the old approach of hoping that everything lines up.
Outstanding. One final wrap-up question gets more back to you, and this is, I call this the science fiction question. You can take a couple of minutes to think about it, but we pose this to all of our guests, and it has to do with the person that, obviously, you've met a lot of amazing people throughout your life, your career so far, many important influencers, no doubt. This is the question about the person that Dr. Fajgenbaum would have wanted to meet. It could be a scientist, it can be an artist, philosopher, whomever. But if you had the chance to go in my hypothetical time machine sitting over here and go speak with somebody that you never met but influenced you nonetheless, who would that be for you?
As you said, this is a tough question, because man, there are a lot of people that I would love to get the chance to meet and to just sit down with them and just listen, and to just ask questions to. So it's a tough question, but I think the first person that comes to mind is Benjamin Castleman. He described Castleman disease back in 1956. He dedicated his life to studying it. He was able to basically start the race. He started this race after this disease, but unfortunately, no one really took the baton after he passed. I mentioned Kazuo Yoshizaki in Japan, who certainly did take the baton in the early 90s, late 80s. I've tried to take the baton in the last 10 years. And I think it would be just so insightful to hear from Benjamin about what it was like to discover a new disease, and to say that this disease has never had a name before. No one's ever studied it, but it's killing people, and we need to put a name on it so we can start to understand what is it, so we can start getting to better treatments, and we can start saving lives. And I've never been in a position to like that, where it's discovering a disease from scratch, but I certainly have been in this position of trying to uncover information about a mysterious disease. And so it would be really just this tremendous honor to meet him and to listen to him. I did have the incredible honor of meeting his daughter last month. My book came out on September 10th, and on September 12th, I gave a talk at a multiple myeloma conference. Multiple myeloma is the form of cancer that's the most similar to Castleman disease. I had this incredible surprise where I gave a keynote at this meeting to multiple myeloma doctors, and his daughter, Benjamin Castleman's daughter, was who introduced me to come on stage. And I didn't know she would be there. I'd never met her before, but to meet her and to be introduced by her, and for her to make some associations in her remarks between her father and I. First off, I don't think there's ever a greater honor than to have someone put you in the same category as one of their parents. I'm a new parent in this 5.5-year remission. My wife and I went on to have a daughter about 14 months ago. And so now being a parent and thinking about, my daughter one day talking about me, and putting someone else in that category, I hope I can only imagine the feeling that I would have. And so I think that would be really a true honor, and I think he'd be the first person that I would mention.
Wonderful, very, very inspirational. Just listening to you talk, it's so inspiring, not just from obviously everything you went through, but the fact that you've persevered and you've dedicated now your life to this, and it's just an amazing. We say in the show, we're moving the human story forward. You're definitely doing that, and I really wish you the best of luck in the programs, and moving forward 2030 and beyond, because it's truly an amazing set of things you're up to, and really a most inspiring story. So once again, for everybody that is watching on the YouTube channel or will be listening on the various radio networks, we've been spending time with the amazing Dr. David Fajgenbaum, assistant professor of medicine at the Division of Translational Medicine and Human Genetics at Penn, associate director of the Patient Impact of the Penn Orphan Disease Center, founding director of the Castleman Disease Center at Penn, and the co-founder and executive director of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. Check out everything that he's doing, all his work, and really everyone get behind him, because folks like this are really what we need in sort of their passion and their drive to getting us to sort of the next stage of the human situation. And Dr. Fajgenbaum, once again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge and share your story with everybody. It's been really great having you.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I would be so thrilled. I talk a lot in the book about this idea of it takes an army, and it has taken an army to get to where we are today. If it was me working on my own, we would have made about 1% of the progress that we've made. We've had a real army. And so I encourage listeners and viewers to join our army. Go to chasingmycure.com. There you can learn about the CDCN, or go to cdcn.org, learn about the work that we do for Castleman disease, but also learn about our vision for the future, the 2030 vision of how this can apply to many other rare diseases, and learn about Chasing My Cure. The book that I mentioned came out last month, and that we're thrilled to hear about how it's spreading across the country and sharing our lessons about life from nearly dying.
Excellent. And we're going to have a dedicated blog page to you, aside from the YouTube and the radio networks, and we'll have all these links there too that people can visit, and that'll be permanent. So once again, really thank you for the time. Wonderful story.
Thank you so much, Ira. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be on your show.
Thanks so much.